Hello, I'm Doreen Ellen Bell Doutan, and I hope herein to be able to make a contribution to the discussion of whether or not abortions should be legal. I don't think that either those speaking for or against are touching on the most important points, at least not the most important points such as I see them, and I should like to discuss that herein. 38-ish years ago, there was a chickenpox outbreak in Israel, and I became ill with chickenpox. And from the way that Dan was treating me when I had the chickenpox, and I was covered with these pox, I knew that I was in a very stable and reliable relationship. I was living on kibbutz, and so I was in a very supportive sociological and economic environment. So I came down with the chickenpox, and I missed the Passover Seder that year because I was running a fever and breaking out with pox. At the same time, I hadn't had my period for 7 or 8 weeks. And so when the nurse on the kibbutz, who is a member of Denny's adoptive family on the kibbutz, everyone on kibbutz who comes from without, who joins the kibbutz, who hasn't been born on the kibbutz, is assigned a family who takes them under their wing and provides a feeling of family for them. So Denny had known this nurse from the time she was a small child, and we felt that we were in good professional hands, caring hands. We were in the best possible environment for a child to be born into. When I got these chicken pox, the nurse came to visit me, and I said to her, please take a blood sample. I haven't had my period in 7 or 8 weeks. And the test came back positive. And I was very, very concerned, because it was such a critical stage in the development of an embryo. I knew that the effects of chickenpox on an embryo are not as catastrophic as that of rubella, but I knew that there were effects possible, and I was deeply, deeply concerned. I was advised by a physician who lived on the kibbutz to have an abortion. She very clinically said to me, you're young, you'll get pregnant again, don't take a chance. And I was of a mind to listen to her. Israel legalizes abortion. But here in Israel, there's another mechanism that we have to encounter before we actually have the abortion. And that is a panel of experts that asks us why we want to have an abortion, so that if we have questions about having abortions, they may be able to provide assistance such that a woman who's having an abortion who doesn't really want to be can be helped otherwise. In addition to that, we have an organization called EFRAT, which provides all of the equipment that poor women need for a year, all of it. The crib, the bassinet, the clothes, the diapers, all the Materna, all of it, or Similac, whatever it is, for a year. So, although abortion is legal, there are also mechanisms in place to allow a woman not to have to make the decision to have an abortion if she's of a divided mind on the subject. So I came up in front of the committee, and they asked me why I wanted to have an abortion. And I was still covered with the sores from the chicken pox, and I said to them, well, look at me, I have chicken pox. I'm in a stable relationship, I'm on kibbutz, so all of the relational, sociological, economic conditions are in place for raising a child. But I'm afraid that the chicken pox might have catastrophically impacted the embryo. I didn't go in there with the attitude of, when they said to me, why do you want to have an abortion? I didn't have the attitude of like, it's none of your BI business. I realized that they were there to help, to give you a chance to think again, and give you the assistance that you needed if you weren't sure. So they said, come back in a week, and in a week's time, a geneticist will be sitting on the panel, and she will give you the information that you require in order to make a reasoned decision. If after hearing what she has to say, you still want to have the abortion, it is your legal right to do so. So Dan and I came back after a week, and the geneticist said that there is a 10% increased chance of there being birth defects as a result of being sick with chickenpox at that stage of pregnancy. So I went home, and Dan and I were talking, and I was talking with the embryo, and together we all came to the conclusion that given the fact that all of the other factors were in place, an additional 10% risk was not enough of a reason to abort the baby. And they already gave me papers with an appointment for an abortion, and we just ripped up the papers and I never went. So I think the way in which Israel handles it, I don't know whether or not they still do it that way, that's the way it was 38 years ago. I presume, if anything, it's even more sophisticated and helpful now. I think that that's a good balance. But even that doesn't talk to the very, very central issue, which is the issue of decision. There was a head of the Israeli Supreme Court who was probably considered the most influential of all of the heads of the Supreme Court. His name is Aharon Barak. And he was our RBG. There's no doubt in my mind that he and RBG were probably working in tandem, because their approaches to judicial process are very, very similar. He was a self-described judicial activist. He believed in judicial activism, which was interpreted by many Israelis, including many Israelis on the left, as judicial butt-in-ism, judicial not knowing the limitations of your authority-ism, judicial invasion of the parameters of the administration and legislative branches of governmentism. He was not a well-received figure. Influential, yes, but I wouldn't say that the Israeli public received him warmly. To him, it is accredited what has become the I forgot the word in English, the expression that most represents a certain way of thinking, Hakol Shafit, meaning everything is subject to judicial deliberation and processes. He himself claims that that quote was lifted out of context, and I respect that, and that's probably true. With it all, with his history of judicial borderline personality disorder, he is associated with that Hakol Shafit. Everything is subject to judicial deliberation and processes and handling. That kind of authoritarian invasiveness on the part of a judiciary, no matter what their decision is, whether you agree with it or not, is frightening. I found Barak to be a frightening figure. And we come to the discussion of what it is to decide. Not in Hebrew, but in English, the term decide contains within it, and it's not me that noticed it, it is generally accepted now, as being that which a decision is taken, meaning all other possibilities are cut off. A decision, which is not an exact translation of the Hebrew hachlata, which has nothing to do with death. But in English, to decide means you cut off all of the branches of what might have evolved from a certain set of circumstances, and you take one road. So it's a kind of very, very radical pruning of reality. There is a narrative in our Torah where on the surface it looks like Moses sees an Egyptian being very, very cruel to the Jewish slaves, and he looks backward and forward, this way and that way, and kills the Egyptian and buries him. It would appear when he looks backward and forward that he's looking to see if anybody is watching him kill the Egyptian. The rabbis had a deeper insight, with which I agree. They said what he was actually doing was looking ko v'cho, meaning this way and that. He was looking back at this man's progenitors and at his future descendants to see whether or not any righteous people would be born from him. If there would be anyone born from his line, that would make a paradigm shifting change in the direction of good. And not seeing that, he did kill him. The rabbis are more correct than they know. The name Moses in Hebrew is Moshe. It is equal to 345, which is the value of the word Shiliah, which is placenta. The name that we attribute to Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher, is equal to 258, which is the value of the term rechamai, which means my compassion or my compassions, and it also means my womb or my wombs. The narrative about Egypt is the narrative of the birth of a nation. We're not looking at what appears to be slavery in another country. You're looking at the embryonic development of Israel and its birth. That narrative about Moshe killing the Hamitzri means that it is the placenta in the womb which made the decision to cut off that particular fetus, to put it to death. In other words, it is the placenta that has the knowledge of whether or not a given embryo is viable, physically viable and morally viable. Whether or not, even though that person might not be a righteous person, righteous descendants will come from them, and whether or not their progenitors have the merit to allow this embryo to become a living being. We as human beings with our limited human consciousness do not have that knowledge. We are not able to look all of the generations back and all of the generations forward and make a decision either pro or con about a pregnancy. We just don't have that ability. Most certainly not if one's decision-making process is a decision. They decide that they are not pruning in a way that necessarily contributes to the best way to life. They're just lopping off a branch without knowing what might grow from that branch. It seems to me, therefore, that we are not able to legislate about whether abortion should be legal or illegal. It is as categorical a decision to decide to allow a pregnancy to continue as it is to not allow a pregnancy to continue. In both cases, we do not have the knowledge of everything that came before, what the merits of that child's progenitors are, neither do we know what's going to come of that birth in future generations. We just don't know. Therefore, it seems to be that the question of whether or not abortion should be legal is not our decision to make. Whether it should be legal or illegal is not our decision to make. We are not capable. Pregnancy is where our finitude touches our infinitude, and we just don't know. My suggestion would be then neither to legalize nor delegalize abortion. To have it in a state in which we are humble enough as a society to say we're not deciding whether or not this is legal or not. We're not making any categorical sweeping decisions about this. We don't know. And then each individual has to make their own decision and pay the consequences for their decision, both allowing a pregnancy to continue or not allowing a pregnancy to continue. We just don't know. When we allow a pregnancy to continue, we don't know whether or not we are birthing the next Pol Pot or the next Albert Schweitzer. Is that his name, Schweitzer? I'm getting old. I'm not good with names. I never have been good with names, and it's worse now. We don't know. So let's just say that because we don't know and we can't know, that we are not deciding as a society. Not for anybody else and not for ourselves. Somebody who is anti-abortion and is forcing another person to go ahead with a pregnancy has no idea what the moral consequences of that are, any more than anybody who is pro-abortion knows what the consequences are. But this I will say to you. No matter what we do, whether we do decide to go on with our pregnancies or we do not, there will be infinite moral consequences. And we, as one of the descendants and progenitors in that line, are going to be affected by it. So we can only do our best. We can only do our best to try to find the best possible partners to have our children with, to create the best possible conditions for one another, and to try to make as moral a decision as possible. At the same time, we have to know that this is a matter that is so above and beyond our ability to comprehend, that we have to allow abortion to exist, because there are certain cases in which it is very definitely called for. A situation in which we know that a baby that would be born would be so deformed that neither would they be able to have children of their own or be able to make a contribution to humanity, would necessarily be aborted. But then there are people who say, I had a child like that, and what I learned from them is immeasurable. It's true that child could never have children of their own. It is true that child was not able to make what society considers a contribution, yet what they taught us is infinite knowledge. I've heard many people say that. So this is something we simply don't know about. Each one of us stand at the interface between our infinitude and our finitude and our infinitude when confronted with a pregnancy, and we just have to do our best. So it should be decriminalized, but neither legalized nor delegalized. This is my opinion, and I'd really like to read your responses to that. Thank you for listening.